So we can just wait like statues for a minute and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the University of Missouri St. Louis. My name is Eamon Wall, a professor and curator of Irish programs at UMSL Global. We have people joining us today from Ireland, from St. Louis, and from other places across the globe. Thank you so much for joining us today and making our event a rich one. Our next event will be a concert on Tuesday, March 8th at 12:30, featuring Pat Broaders and Andrew O'Brien, the concert of Irish traditional music and song. On April 14th, we will host Dave Hannigan and Ed Golterman for a program on De Valera's visits to the US. On April 16th, we will host our annual gala concert in the Lee Theatre on campus, featuring Martin Hayes and his ensemble. Tickets are available and information too through the Toohill Performing Arts Centre on campus. Special thanks today to Leanne Constantine, Executive Director of UMSL Global, and to Bob L., our Senior Director of Programming, for making this event and all our events on campus possible. Today's event, like all of our events, will run for 1 hour and 15 minutes approximately. Both of our writers will read for 25 minutes. At the end, we will have time for some questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A and I will read them to the poets. This event is a webinar. You will see the poets, but they won't see you. Patrick Kehoe will read first and Susan Lindsay second. So just as, again, everybody is most welcome. So it's a great pleasure to host this poetry reading today. Since we started these programs in 2000, we have always included literature and poetry in particular as part of our programming. Our first reader is Paddy Kehoe. So introducing Paddy, I will say at the outset that he's one of my best friends and one of my oldest friends. We grew up together in Enniscorthy and have remained friends through the decades. Of course, just because he's a friend of mine does not mean that only friends of mine are invited to take part in this series. Paddy Kehoe's poetry has been published widely in journals and magazines in Ireland and in 3 collections. It's Words That You Want, Salmon, publishing 2011, The Cask of Moonlight, published by Daedalus in 2014, and Places to Sleep, published in 2018. Paddy's work ranges widely, but is perhaps most notable.
Sound's gone. Hey, Eamon, your sound cut out.
So go ahead, Paddy.
Thanks, Eamon. Just missed you there for the last few minutes. The sound cut out, but you can hear me.
We can hear you fine.
Thanks, Bob. I'd like to begin with a poem called Townlands. And I suppose it's a kind of a way of saying hello or goodbye, really, in a way, to my father, who had died about 12, 13 years beforehand. And rather than being a direct poem for him, it was a kind of way of talking to him through the material of the poem, which is a little bit indirect. Townlands, and there's an Irish translation. You have not said Gary Loch, Gary Nisk, Mount Daniel in almost 20 years. Nor have you named Killisk, Courtclough, Ballyboy. As I walked out one midsummer morning, I thought of the long ago and was not reconciled with your vanished townlands. Loganham, near Lewis and Gory Fluck, Gory Nishke, no Moin Donal. The Knockmore Fiha Blean the Newis. Contrachter Killiske, Courtclough, no an Vulia Von. Modinagan, Lauren Taurig, is Mayor Fawn, near Awas McCumas, and Nirisha Akir Umse. The way of saying hello to Dad was through the townlands I used to hear him name in his conversation or in his anecdotes, and it was just an indirect path. That's Townlands. Read this poem called Farewell to Erin. It's about packing up and going. The mouldering hardbacks never read, gilt script on dark purple or wine dark boards. Unable to take any more, he left them on the low shelves, under the stone pyramid of the steeple, forever in the skylight of boyhood. He touched the wallpaper a last time, the pattern of raised coloured beads, blisters of damp, the bedspread, once familiar as thought. The last broken bell pull, he packed the pony and trap, drew the door and drove. I want to read a poem from my daughter, Sorka, who has been immense help to me here on the technical side, as the man said. This one's called, I remember she was going to America to study in South Carolina for a few months, 10 years ago, actually. And I remember it was the first time she was leaving home, really, aside from her year in school away when she was younger, but first time going to a different continent. I remember that sense of impending departure and separation. And I remember one night she was sitting in the car and a tune came on the radio, a traditional tune. And she just said, I like that. Horsaile is the title, which in Irish means, which in English means across the salt water, across the ocean, across the sea, whatever. Horsaile. You leaned to the windscreen, a moth straining to get close to the bright tune. I like that, you said. Bobby Gardner's button accordion rippling across the static. The last morning, you were still the pretty maid milking her cow. I noticed you again standing alone in the green groves. Up in the room, I saw you comb your hair and curl it. Then you were the empty space, black as night, on the quay wall. So the absence and the separation. But the poem, by the way, if you're wondering about pretty maids milking cows and all that, I worked in the titles of traditional Irish tunes like the Green Groves, the pretty maid milking her cow, comb your hair and curl it. They're the titles of the tunes I worked in. I lived in Barcelona between 78 and 80. And I have one abiding memory of being in the bar I used to like to go to in the latter months. One abiding memory of the barman who was from Chile. Hernan was his name. And the guy I used to sort of sit down with, have a few beers with or whatever, he was a great flamenco player, Isidro. And I remember Isidro saying to Hernan one night, just across the counter, quite casually, late, in the small hours, late, maybe 12:01, ¿Por qué coño largaste de Chile? Why did you leave Chile? And I remember Hernan had some answer, which I can't remember, but it was kind of a diffident answer. But given the weight of history from Chile, it seemed to me that, shall we put it this way, there was a story there. It had to be. She left Chile in the 70s or even the early 80s. Chile. ¿Por qué largaste de Chile? 40 years since Isidro asked Hernan why he left. Dark olive eyes fixed on the honey pine countertop. Not a drop spilled. The night held its own. Haunted emigre features. Candid El Greco face. The feint of the question and Hernan's forgotten reply. I can see that tableau as clear as daylight, and 42 years later. And I often think about that bar, and I've written maybe too many poems about it. Another one is Tawny or Ruby Light. Here's another poem about that bar. Tawny or Ruby Light. Tawny, or it might be ruby light within. The way the camera occludes in a photograph taken outside the bar window. The one moving between tables might be the color blur itself. And have they changed the sign over the door? And what else disturbs? That deliberately uncertain glow, as though to say, no business of yours anymore. Cotton clouds sailing through the sky's vault. I remember my mother, late in life, she surprised me by saying something one day, just casually in the kitchen. There was a cousin of ours in the kitchen, and just the way she said it was kind of interesting. That she figured life was a bottle of smoke, really. It was oddly realistic kind of thing to say, and not voiced in a terribly negative way, because she would have delivered it in with a kind of a shrug off smile or laugh, that kind of throwaway remark. Bottle of smoke. My mother once said years ago that life was a bottle of smoke. I see now the whirls and curls uncoiling inside the body, drifting toward the narrow neck with no cap on the bottle and charcoal feathers expanding. My son Cormac, I have great memories of being in Barcelona 10 years ago to the year 2011. Well, a little bit more even, and he was over on a soccer week, and we were the dads, and he was over with the county soccer team of his age group, which is about 14, 15. So there was a couple of trips, and there was a game against a local team and all that. So I have funny memories of that week. It was strange being back in that city that I used to live in, and on this occasion being back with my son 30 years later, really. Cornelia is the name of the poem, and it's the name of an area to the northwest of the city. In fading light, the memory of Cornelia and the field of play. They mark it out in white for more skillful players. Once it was the very arrowhead and the aim entwined. Trained on a morning, we rode the trains upwards to Cornelia. The hours moved too fast, the sawbones of our days. Once we awoke to the heat and dust of a blessed dawn, and processed through an afternoon that would fade in dusk above the battlements. Yeah, it's curious that particular week spawned poems. And another one, which is in my second book, The Cask of Moonlight. Cornelia. I climbed and saw a great sight, Norman Foster's communications tower, and the Temple del Sagrat Cor on the summit of Tibidabo, shimmering in the heat haze. I have tried to find our casual ways again, that Easter week of endless walking. 1 year gone, and the merciless slide makes memory too a heat haze. Municipal leaves of the city's trees have turned to lasting shadows. All our happiness detonates in these indelible streets. That's correct, yeah. So, just a memory of a kind of a week that sometimes a week stays with you and you kind of wonder why, but it stays with you. Because it was, you know, I suppose it was the echo of my own time and then the new time and the young fella. I just want to read this poem. It begins in the early hours. It's just a little YouTube I saw once of a man in Greece just walking along with a bucket and a kind of some kind of hooked kind of implement. It's not clear in the film what he was doing or where he was going, but it set me thinking as to what he was at. It begins in the early hours. This is the name of the poem. It begins in the early hours. So much depends upon the man walking in the street, shortly after dawn, a bucket in his right hand, an implement with hooks, held vertically in the other. He is walking towards the seafront. It begins in the early hours, the straining footsteps on the bedroom floor, a dim light beneath the door, the young son waking to hear the future sounds of labour. Yes, Simon.
Could you just mute your microphone and then unmute it, because there's interference there.
Yeah, muted. Just a second now.
Or even back up from the computer a little bit.
Mute the mic. Here comes my technical assistant. Can you mute the mic?
Of course. Yep. There we go. Mute.
It's muted now again. You need to unmute it.
Yeah.
Okay, we still have the interference a little bit, so if you could just move back a little bit from the screen, might help.
Yeah, how?
There's some sort of other appliance or electronics in your room there.
There's a
that may
phone.
be interfering with your computer.
Could you turn off your phone?
I will, absolutely. That may well be it, Bob, yeah. I wonder, is it any... Now, will I unmute again?
You're not muted.
I'm not muted. Oh, okay. Is everything all right now?
No, we're still hearing it.
Yeah, the phone is out of the room, so... There's no other appliance here at all.
Might be your computer itself.
Just, do you want to pause for a second, mute and turn off your camera?
No, there's... I don't know what to suggest for you.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Just pause for a second, turn off your camera, and see if you can sort it out, and then come back on again.
Sure. Come on. Just turn off the camera and turn off the and mute it.
No, come here a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for your patience, everybody in the audience, while we get this sorted out if we can.
Oh yeah, Bob, Eamon.
Yeah, we still hear the interference, but I think we'll just go on because there's probably no way that we can.
If I sit back here.
So if you just continue with the reading, Paddy, and we'll just.
I can't think what would alter the.
Okay. Well, if you just move on from where we were, it'd be great.
Yeah. I want to read a poem. I want to read a poem for Mary, and it's called Viaticum. I feel it trickling as though it were the conversation of others, heard on a fair to middling day. Sometime, this time, will seem precious metal in the sublime river of constant loss, seepage. So I will retrace my route to where all seem to be headed, be it by Ronde de Saint-Père, Arc de Triomphe, or Carré de Caspe. I will try to memorize the exact way I took on the most innocent of journeys, what gold it was, and praise three shadows and their viaticum. So again, that's a poem about Spain. The sound is still a bit dodgy, is it, I guess? The sound is still a bit poor.
It sounds much better now. It's much better.
My father had an idea to write a piece once about a river called the Sow River, which flows through an area near where he grew up, which is in this County Wexford, where I live. It's about, I don't know, 10, 12 miles out the road. Sow River. He wrote the piece for a local newspaper, and we kind of figured, are they going to use it? As it happens, they did use it, and I kind of like to think that maybe I inherited something from him, in terms of writing. It was a prose piece, but it was very kind of poetic. He talked about the river wriggling like a white worm as it neared the Wexford Harbour, which is where it went into, where the river, which only runs for 10 miles, it's a small river, where the river finished. Sow River. Dad was writing at the kitchen table about the Sow River, which passed near the house he grew up in. Wriggling like a white worm in agony, he wrote of its minnow old age as it approached the mud banks of Wexford Harbour. Mother and I scorned and teased. His literary efforts were fair game somehow. I think the local paper printed his encomium. I wish I had it now and could see with his eyes the river in the low mist flowing through the fields. He had an Avenger, his car. He had an Hillman Avenger that he bought secondhand from somebody. And I made the mistake in the poem of calling it a Ford Avenger. And it's here in my first book, It's Words You Want. And it ain't going to change. It's still called Ford Avenger. And there's no such thing as a Ford Avenger. It's a Hillman Avenger. And an ex-guard came up to me at the end of the launch of this book to tell me there is no Ford Avenger. There's a Hillman Avenger. And this poem is about living in a house with your dad and sometimes rubbing against each other, maybe abrasively or whatever. I mean, figuratively speaking. Maybe not always getting on. Old gold Ford Avenger, take me back to winter mornings. Unappreciated time bolted down like breakfast. Dispatched when days seemed 10 a penny. Hot exhaust pipe revving against the hoary morning, while you scrape the frost from the windscreen to go somewhere, out some road, any road, unappreciated, and distance kept between us like an old crowbar. I mentioned earlier a chap called Isidro. He was a flamenco player. I could Google from here till eternity. I will not get any trace of Isidro. Not to be found, written off the internet maps of the world, as indeed is Hernan. At least I had Isidro's surname, but it doesn't seem to work. Anyway, I remember nights in that bar and he playing the guitar. Brilliant flamenco guitarist, most modest man, just charming and full of bonhomie and good humor. He smoked cigarettes like a trooper, Ducados brand. Just smoked endlessly. And that's when you could smoke in bars. Many is the night. Isidro, dear friend, where are you? Do you still tend an inner fire? Many is the night in that bar in Plaza Molina. You took down the guitar from the wall and held it in your hands to squeeze out sparks across the starry ravine. When night began to falter, the guitar lay back and slept in its case. I walked home through streets humming with cable noise, the sky reading with light. Catalan, the sound of it, which is the language principally spoken in Barcelona and in Catalonia. Catalan, to hear the odd phrase can set up kind of a memory train with me a little bit. The street has certain Catalan words. If I go down the street of certain Catalan words and phrases, they carry me as pallbearers do, or like a father lifting his infant son. They detain with sweetness words that kill the dour day and hold the blue at bay. Words like rebages, tancat iure, meaning reductions, closed and free. Hanker to nights I tracked cigar smoke, drew sustenance from open doors, in diners at long tables, talking in rooms of amber light and wine. I don't want to stop memory to hold the blue at bay. I want to wallow in its big picture. So the street of certain words in Catalan is the bazaar into which I slip without a word to anyone. So many of my poems are looking at that city, that vast city, that vast sprawling teeming city, are looking at it as it was really, I suppose, back then. In all its dirty petrol and all its exhaust fumes and its peculiar raggle-taggle charm. Sky slipping towards twilight. I have almost lost sight of the sun glint, whatever it was. The very corpuscles of that city. Mangle of antennae on roofs. Sky slipping towards twilight. I strained to see the city at that time. Memorial, composed in shy bather light. Under water with the babble of voices. Old slide of sun, tang of shadow. And this idea that you felt that there was a heart, a core, central locus in the city, something ineffable inside at the center of it, not just the old quarter, but something abstract. The well. These are the ways out, the mercurial names at the edge of the city. Horta, Hospitalet, Val d'Hebron. Drivers race in clusters and barely see the signs. White letters on blue road signs point the exits away from the torrid centre, and the well in the secret bower drawn on forever. The odd time I would receive a letter from, I'm looking for the poem now, Mother's Letter. The odd time I'd receive a letter when I was living in Barcelona. It was just 2 years, but it seemed replete, it seemed fuller than that. Mother's Letter. Clouds here are bruised, a kind of blue and violet. From the storm-battered island comes Mother's letter. Small news woven by her sure hand, reeling me in on its line, born on the wings of blind trust. At home, cattle hoofs hock holes in the dark and wet headland. A dawdling family are on paseo along the shiny flags of Plaza de Catalunya. They don't know this slim youth rambling on the fringes of time's fairground. Then a lip of crimson insinuates the November sky before darkness swallows all the years. I must be coming near the end. I'd say 25 minutes have elapsed somehow. I'll read just one or two more. Stare of Memory. This one's called Stare of Memory. Gradually into the drifting afternoon comes the dogged stare of memory. Sunlight's open secret concealed in the sprinkling of the fountain spray. There may have been years ago on the ragged edges of the city, in some cafe with a plastic sign, the very thing to waylay memory that weighs anchor today. Walk now, manacled by lost time, struck dumb by the glare. March in step through the shards of sunlight. Hold out and do not falter under the cold stare of memory. And I think I will leave with a poem about my mother, who used to have to work as a nurse in Dublin and could only go home once a year in the 40s and 50s. There were the times I were in it. For a variety of reasons, she could only return home to an idyllic part of County Limerick. Maybe, a 4-hour train journey, 5-hour train journey, and yet she was only allowed to go once a year for various reasons. Too long to go into. Duty, the discipline of it, whatever. Mother's Dublin train. You always said you wished you were that cow, whisking flies with her tail from off her back, but the train moved on, and the clatter over tracks rang the changes relentlessly onto the city, which duly presented dour steps of grime. You followed upwards, dutifully on time. Did you take a laurel leaf from home, or from the walls, a flake of lime? Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward now to hearing Susan's wonderful, wonderful work.
Thank you very much, Paddy, for that wonderful reading.
I hope some of it was clarity in some of it.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Thank you. One of the reasons we use the webinar is to keep out Zoom bombers, but in this case, the technology was a Zoom bomber. So, but we managed to get through it. And thank you so much for those wonderful poems about Ireland, and particularly about Barcelona. Paddy's 3 books of poems. 2 are published by Salmon Poetry, and 1 is published by Daedalus. So if you get a chance, you can buy those books in any bookstores in Ireland, and in the US they're all available online. So our second reader today is Susan Lindsay, and Susan Lindsay's 3 collections of poetry are published by Dura Press. And Dura Presses are here today attending the reading. They're a wonderful publisher in County Galway, publishing poetry and prose. And so the 3 books that Susan has published are Milling the Air, 2018, Fear Not, 2013, and Whispering the Secrets 2011. In addition to the fine lyric poems included in these collections, Susan was also a founder of Skylight 47, one of Ireland's best literary journals. Susan lived in Galway for many years, and St. Louis, as our people here in St. Louis know, is a sister city. And so we have always, over the years of running these events, invited people from Galway to participate because they're from a sister city, but also because of the excellence of writing and culture and music that comes from Galway. Susan nowadays lives in County Wicklow. And Susan also spent a number of years working as a psychotherapist. And I think that this fact, in addition to her great gifts as a lyric poet, has made her into a most compelling and unique voice in Irish poetry. So it is a great thrill and a great honor to welcome Susan Lindsay here today to read for us. Welcome, Susan.
Thanks very much, Eamon. It's just great to be reading for the University of Missouri St. Louis. Hard to believe. Thank you very much. It was always a great part of life in Galway for the years that I lived there when you arrived into the Over the Edge readings in the summer. And laterally, I was at some of the West Side mics where some of the students in the summer school read some memorable poems. So hopefully we're going to get back to some of that, which would be wonderful, even though I'm now living on the East Coast in the Garden County of Wicklow. But I have such happy memories of Galway, and it's still a kind of home to me. Given that it's Valentine's Day next week, I thought I would begin with at least a nod to romance. So I'm going to read you my poem, My Love We Must. My love, we must have passed each other by, where I have caught sight of you in commonplace romance, the small moments of every day. In the arms of one I felt sure was mine, but who was not, and in delicious expectation of hands held after a brush of lips. In another climate, the sun on rocks, arid sand and dry grass might have shown us a dark-skinned chameleon in the shadows before disappearing down a crevice. You must take trains across Europe, boat journeys down the Nile and into the depths of the Amazon, for I have been beside you there, fire crackling in the black, black night, a chanting dancer. We may have been star children, may have been made of clay, sung songs chipped and eroded by polishing, painted on the walls of caves, seen the sun rise on the cusp of the wave from the pebbled lakeside shore. We must have passed each other by this time around, but I don't give up hope. I cling to all we have known and to what is to come. Maybe if I close the book, we will find each other between the leaves of fresh covers. Another day, another time, possibly even over a leaf. In Ireland, of course, we have 4 geographical provinces, but there's also the 5th province, which is the province of our mythological province, the province of our dreaming. So this is a poem that I wrote in the first book, collection with Dura Press, the Whispering the Secrets is the title, and it's called Constituency. And somehow it seems to me to speak as much now as to any time. Constituency. This is my country, always new. I want to know, what are you dreaming? Or have your dreams got lost in the helter-skelter? When you moan about standards lost, when you cast off garments of decency and leave behind the time to talk to neighbors, the ashes of an autocratic church that was comfort, what are you dreaming? In the financial crash, Ireland was left in fairly bad straits. That's around 2008 and just afterwards. In fact, we haven't really recovered, except on the surface. And there was an invitation sent out to people abroad and to come and visit family and homelands and to come home. And it was quite controversial. Some people thought it was a rather cynical exercise to ask people to come to visit to help the economic state of the country. But in fact, lots of people did come, met their cousins, found homesteads they'd never visited that belonged to their previous generations. And there were many parties. And after it, I wrote this poem called Gather In. Gather in where the great oak tree has its roots. Between them, eroded soil affords shelter. The trunk sturdy behind our backs. They spread a cavern beneath. The tap far below imagining feeds seed of fruits falling from the spread and alchemy of branches above. A canopy reaching across lands and seas where the acorns fall. Imaginings torn with leaves from the reach by gales that shipwreck occasional bearers, scurry others to shelter. A gentler wind lands empty husks to decompose. Compose ground where earthed corns release sapling varieties of old tunes. Tap rhythms for the feet of new generations. Shelter where the old roots break ground. Harvest, thanks. Heart is a word that only needs one more letter to become a hearth. And in the series of poems that were called Milling the Air, that were the title poems for this, my most recent collection, Milling the Air, many of them are about the windmill that's on the cover, but there is also one about turf. And last year, the last of the peat burning furnaces fueling our electricity was closed, because we do have now to save the bogs, to allow for the carbon that's in the atmosphere, but also to save precious ecosystems. And it was at a Green Foundation Ireland that I heard Catherine Farrell give a lecture about the bogs and their sustainability. And so I thought I'd like to read you this poem, because I have a belief that until we can really honor and appreciate the place of the turf fire in the psyche, really, of the Irish, I don't think we'll be able to stop burning them. These fires were on the hearths, they were kept alive day and night, and they were provided heat, the means of cooking, and the dreaming that went on when you look into the glowing ashes. And when the emigrants left, the story goes that they took the ashes from the hearth and brought it to the neighbor's hearth to keep it alive. And it will remain alive in our imagination. But this is my poem, Milling the Air, turfed out after Catherine Farrell. The man with the digger shifts gear, reverses, turns to fill drains dug for 30 years, seed species lost to ignited sods in the hearths of cold homes, heat, dreams, a fifth province. As the turf cutters turn their skill as they once turned sods to wetting, no longer dry stack out, but tuck damply in, bed the bog, that there be a bog. I was looking back at one of the last readings that you hosted, Eamon, in this series, And you had Emer Martin talking about the cruelty man, phrase I hadn't heard for a long time, in her wonderful book by the sound of it. And she mentioned in it her belief that the Magdalene homes and many of the terrible things that happened to women in Ireland were due to a deep fear of women's sexuality. And it made me think of a poem I wrote in my first collection called Hags Dancing Over Doorways that I want to read for you now. And I'm interested in Sheila na gigs, and that's what we're talking about in this poem. And there have been several books written about these icons, really, in stone with open vulva, many of them over church doorways, which seems quite extraordinary. But I don't think there's really been any definitive exploration. And I tried writing a myth some years ago, really to explore what it means to me. And this is my poem on the subject, Hags Dancing on Doorways. Over doorways. Hags dancing over doorways, exposed genitalia, open invitation, enthroned in stone, embedded in lintel above the entrance to churches in Ireland and Great Britain. Sheila na gigs jig, where least expected, talismans to ward off evil, fertility symbols or opportunity to face the fearful feminine. Mother, maiden, sister, crone, the goddess Sophia, the one who knows, who knows. In China, a Sheila na gig icon, now excavated alongside mummies. Kirkin families with red-brown hair, Celtic ancestors where none were known to be. I mentioned the Magdalene laundries, and I know in your interview, Eamon, with Emer Martin, that you also said that there are families in St. Louis who've also been touched by these stories and by the people who have lived or suffered through the Magdalene laundries. And it's a story that continues as people try to make connections with family. So I wrote a poem called, in my current collection, called To the Fathers. And this was in March 2017, when Radio Telefiseren, the national television station here, scrolled the names down a screen of all the children born in institutions in Ireland. Well, certainly those that they could name anyway. Just trying to look for it now. To the fathers born in institutions, of children born in institutions. I'm going to read that again. To the fathers of children born in institutions, March 2017. How was it this week, watching the names roll down a screen? Your silent shame, all pervading absence, raises questions. Did your child survive? Visible in faces at airports? Do you search for the contours of visages reflecting your own? Did you too become an exile? Carry it with you to foreign parts. Bury your grief. Does your shame scald, pervade all our squirms pervasive as we endeavor to conceive space for every child, each voice, you? Another vein, this Milling the Air book has quite a lot about identity through as a theme running through it as well. And I'm sure we've all had a photograph sometimes in our lives that we couldn't bear to see again and wanted to cut up. So that is relevant to this poem that I'm about to read now, that was published in Poetry Ireland Review, can be seen online there. So when they've grown another me on a peat tree, what a dish that will be. They took a picture of my passport in the building society, my mobile phone number to allow them send me code numbers to ensure extra security, to add to the other questions, all of which could be answered by anyone who cared to do a little research. It makes your online presence more secure. My identity online is now a product, my profile a saleable commodity I get no payment for. My revenue number, once private, alongside the mugshot taken to ensure depersonalization on the card, my pass to free transport, that has me turn to writing verse, restrain myself from cutting it to pieces. It should come with a government warning. This could damage your mental and physical well-being. When will 3D printed bones and organs supplant the you once were? When the only thing left to identify me distinctly is my DNA, and they take a sample of that and grow me on a petri dish for stem cell research, or to have a copy in case they lose me, will there be anything left to lose? To whom will I belong? Who or what kind of a dish will that one be? It was a great moment in my life when I had the opportunity, through the good offices of Eleanor Hooker down in Tipperary, the Irish poet, to interview your twice poet laureate at the US Congress, Library of Congress, for Skylight 47, that Eamon mentioned, the magazine, or the newspaper magazine. In fact, it was Eamon who was in Galway at the time we were trying to decide whether to use the newspaper, who reassured us of similar publications in the United States. And as we were saying, they've now had their 15th issue published last month. But I was only there at the beginning, and I got to interview Kay Ryan, and it was a wonderful privilege, really, and joy. So I was a bit lost last month in my writing. I'm sure we've all had our struggles in the pandemic. And I discovered that Kay Ryan has brought out a book of essays called Synchronizing Gravity, and she got me going again. But I was inspired by meeting her to write a poem after her. She loves malapropisms, kind of sayings that, missayings and proverbs and aphorisms. So we all know about, it's the early bird that catches the worm, and we know about the tortoise and the hare fable. And the other thing that's relevant to this poem is that I had just watched a television program about snails and how when they go across the backyard at night, they often can use the trail of the one ahead to get along quicker. So this is Slow Coach Catches the Worm after Kay Ryan. Snails and tortoises don't have much in common with the robin, whose bright breast might not be best suited for catching the worm unaware. The female of the species, less brightly feathered, can seize opportunity when it rises, unbidden, not flaunting, daring. Her true color hidden. Winning ways and beauty adorn the tortoise. Her shell at its best is protecting her back. On many occasions, hidden meandering capacity lengthens longevity. Even slime can be piggybacked upon, have us travel remarkable distance, uncover a winning line we didn't expect, to find, never mind, cross over. before the hair of the dog has been raised to her lip. I have two more short poems for you. So I'd like to say my thank you now. Thank you so much for listening and for your attention and for showing up today. And thank you very much for inviting me, Eamon. It's been a real privilege. And Bob, for looking after the sound as best you could. And Paddy, it was a real privilege to read with you, and I greatly enjoyed your poems. Thank you. So my second last poem is from my book, Fear Not. The title probably indicates a bit that I was dealing with fear through this book, partly because I'd had a health scare and it made me ponder on the issue. And I also heard at the time, I often write poems because several things kind of come together in my mind. And I'd heard at the time that the last patients in one of the biggest mental asylums, as it used to be called, in Dublin, were without staff at Christmas. So they were to be put into a locked ward that otherwise they wouldn't be in. And we were also worrying about our mental health services and how poor they are, or how not well resourced they were, something that's still an issue today. So all these things came together in this poem called In the Darkness. In the darkness of the asylum, she made papier-mâché beads from crushed paper, the stickiness satisfying her fingers immersed in glue, smoothing torn squares in layers on the surface. When the occupational therapist spent the last of her budget on metallic paint and a volunteer donated gold, she found light, could create something beautiful. And lastly, and I'm reading this for Lisa Frank of Dur Press. When I go to the Atlantic coast, all I want to do is dance on beaches. Well, actually on the mountains too, but we're sticking to beaches today because I wrote a series of poems in Whispering Secrets, the first book, called Dancing on Beaches. In fact, I wrote them, the first draft, sitting in a surfing hut at a cafe at Strand Beach in Sligo. But this one is about Dogs Bay and Roundstone. So thank you once again so very much. Dancing on Beaches for Dogs Bay, Roundstone. Ocean, be mine. White sand stretches to the curve of the dunes and the headland beyond. But I wait until my return to the shelter of the first rocks that make a cove. And then, out of sight of houses perched on the hillside, I sing. Ocean, be mine. My sound and that of the sea are one. I dance on the sand with the waves. Seal woman. Recede. Leave only dampness behind. As I dance, I remember you were to take me to dinner when you visited friends in Roundstone. I have heard not one word. And I ride the waves as white stallions, leave a taste of salt in the air.
Thank you so much, Susan, for a wonderful reading. All the poems were great, though maybe my two favorites were the last two. And so it was a great highlight at the end of it. So just wonderful poems. If anybody listening and watching today would like to purchase Susan's 3 collections of poetry, they're published by Doire Press, Doire Press in Galway. And if you can't get them in the shop, you can get them online, or you could even contact Doire Press directly, and they would be able to to get the books to you. So there are two wonderful readings today, and two very, very different readings, you know, and I think it's part of the richness of Irish poetry that the poetry can be so good and can be so different, and the poems come from all kinds of different places. So we at the University of Missouri St. Louis are thrilled to have had the opportunity to host this reading today. If anybody would like to ask a question or make a comment, if you could do so in the Q&A. And if while you were thinking of a question, I can just read some of the chat from here. People, Mary Power writes, really enjoyed the readings. Lovely to hear you both, Paddy and Susan. Pity about the sound, but that was, I think, beyond our control. I loved your relaxed pacing, Susan. And Best from Kinvara, so that may be Mary Medek, perhaps. And Mary was one of the readers who read for us last year, and she praised a number of the poems as well. And also a number of comments from your publisher at Dura Press, John Walsh, saying how much he enjoyed the poems and was moved by him. And so I'm trying to talk a little bit so that a question will come in. And John Walsh writes to say that also Lisa is there as well, right? John is doing the typing, but both John and Lisa are there listening and participating. So nobody has asked a question. So I will ask a question first for Susan, and then for Paddy. So Susan, you mentioned Kay Ryan, of course, who's a great American poet, I suppose, an Irish American poet in some way with a name like Ryan. And is American poetry something that you've read a lot through your career? Are you a fan of American poetry? Are there American poets that really speak to you?
Well, obviously, Kay Ryan has got to be. But yeah, I read different poems from different places, really, at different times, I find. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I suppose people talk about influences, you know, and I think I'm less influenced than supported by. So sometimes when I read like Ryan's essays or some of Adrian Rich's work or Marion, I'm having a blank, but you probably know who I'm talking about. They're very encouraging and inspiring, and yeah, those are the people that come to mind immediately. I'm going a bit big on it, but Emily Dickinson, of course, is what. So I'll leave it at that.
And of course, Adrian Rich has been a great hero figure for writers everywhere internationally, but particularly women writers, you know, and is very, very widely read in Ireland. Okay, wonderful. And Paddy, you've also been a musician. You know, some of your poems were set to music by the Irish musician Sonny Condell, and he recorded them. So has this always been something that's been, you know, that in your kind of career, that music and poetry, poetry and music, are you coming at poetry through music or through poetry? I mean, how are they connected?
Yeah, the curious thing, Eamon, is I couldn't write a song. I can't write songs anymore. You know, the poems took over, and I just impossible to write a song, personally speaking. Sonny saw something in the lyrics that was material for songs, and obviously they struck chords with him because, you know, he put wonderful melodies and arrangements to those lyrics. But personally speaking, no, I could write nothing. Now, I think music helped me with tonal stuff in the poems. You know, I consider the tone and the sound of words terribly important. You know, Yeats said something like, "Words alone are certainly good, but actually I kind of nearly rephrase it. You know, the sounds alone are certain good. Love the sound of words, and I like the idea too of using words that maybe slightly off meaning, you know, to use them in a kind of a, when they don't quite totally fit the bill, yet they sound good on the sentence. And I think there's something musical there, maybe, you know, but certainly there are two different persuasions for me. Writing a song, I couldn't write a song to save my life.
Okay. Okay, very good. And thank you to the people in the Q&A for coming to help me out. So the first question is for Susan from Mary Madec. Susan, why do you think there is such a flourishing of poetry in Ireland, especially women's poetry?
Well, I suppose one reason might be that the lid has come off. You know, people are finally getting to express themselves and to get published and get heard more, if you're talking about women's poetry. I think there's a tremendous support for places like the Over the Edge readings and events and other readings in Galway. Support, I suppose, by the Arts Council for readings around the country. There's on Bale in Cork, and there are quite a few journals publishing poetry, and there's Crannog that was in Galway for years, and was a very important place that people could present their poetry. And then there's Poetry Ireland Review, of course, and there used to be the Shop, which was a great journal. So I don't know, I'd be very interested in knowing Mary's views about it, but yeah.
Well, we can't hear Mary's views because we haven't got her on
no, but we
on
can
the mic today.
acknowledge that we'd like to hear them.
Yeah. But Mary also has a question for Paddy. So this is from Mary Madec. Paddy, did you write your poems about Barcelona while you lived there or afterwards?
Kind of both, really, you know, both really, but most of them are written afterwards. You know, it's a different Barcelona. I couldn't really see myself writing too much about the way it is now. You know, it's a very globalized city now, I think. Still has the lineaments of the old city and everything and all that. And that's very inspiring. But, you know, when you walk around and you see Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's and Starbucks and all that, you kind of go, I think I could see that in Copenhagen, or I could see it in St. Louis, I could see it in... It doesn't take away, but it alters utterly the perception of the city. And to answer Mary's question, yeah, most of them are written since. I would also add, Susan, to the list, Cyphers is fantastic outlet for poetry. Elaine Nicolaine's wonderful biannual, whatever it is, and wonderful resource for publication. God knows it's hard enough to get our poems out there.
Okay, very good. So we've two more questions, and both are from Drusilla Wall, who's in this house upstairs. So the first one is for Susan. Susan, does your study of psychology influence your poetry, and how does that feel?
Hi, Drusilla. It's wonderful to hear you, and thanks for your messages in the chat. Yes, it does, definitely. It's hard to say directly. You know, when I first went to a poetry workshop when I was beginning to write, I was hoping to leave everything to do with that side of my life behind. And then I discovered we had loads of covert psychologists and psychotherapists in the group. So I think there must be something about that movement on to poetry. But yeah, I do think that I'm coming from that kind of perspective of looking at things from all the wrong language, like a deeper consciousness, you know, things. But I do think they go together. And I think in some ways, the fact that so many people with an interest in psychology are moving to write poetry, it's a kind of natural progression, you know, to find another language and that meets these two worlds. There's a wonderful phrase I came upon at the beginning of Paula Meehan's. You asked me about American poets, but Paula Meehan's a great favorite of mine. in Ireland. And at the beginning of her Imaginary Bonnets with Real Bees in Them, when she was Ireland Professor of Poetry, she says, poetry can be considered as a negotiation in words between no mind and mind. And I think that, speaks to why psychology people might be interested.
Okay, all right. Very good. And then the last question is for Paddy, also from Drusilla Wall. What one or two places in Ireland that you find inspiring for poetry in addition to County Wexford? Does the landscape speak to you?
That's a really interesting question, Drew, and thank you, because I could kind of answer that now, because I was in Dublin for 30 years in the most recent part of my life. I mean, I've been Dublin on and off, and that stopped 2 years ago, almost to the month. And I've been thinking about Dublin at night, in the suburbs, the lanes, or the streets during the day, and the walk I used to do around the block and all that. So actually, Dublin has been, much to my own surprise, as kind of, it's been a place that I've been thinking of. Isn't it curious? A place that I took for granted. I suppose that's the way with all of us. As soon as I was banished and literally told to get the hell out of it, as we all were, because that was it. That was COVID. Out you go and don't come back until this is sorted, and they haven't even come back on campus where I used to work in RTE. It's only, a certain amount of people are back, but sense of banishment there, and unwitting banishment, and thus fantasy about Dublin, and thinking about Dublin, and romancing in your own mind about Dublin. So yeah, Drew, lovely question. Dublin, definitely an odd reply, I know, but because usually people signal the rural scene, but I would have to say South Dublin, Sandymount, Donnybrook, just walking into town over Leeson Street Bridge, or walking out of town over Leeson Street Bridge, and through the Green, Stephen's Green. It's very hard to not see the beauty there when you're banished from it.
Okay, all right, that's great. That's a great answer. And so there's a whole lot of wonderful messages in the chat. So particularly responding to the poems and responding to the readings. And of course, we at UMSL really appreciate the thanks from everybody for hosting the reading. It's really our privilege to be able to do this, and in some ways, the pandemic has made it easier in some ways for us to do these events, because we can just get in, have the readings on Zoom, and so it's helped us in various ways. We're coming to the end of the time now, so just let me thank the two poets, Patrick Kehoe and Susan Lindsay, for these wonderful and inspiring readings. Also, again, thank my colleague Bob L. at UMSL Global for making all of this possible. And but thank you so much to the audience for tuning in with us today. In the chat, people have said thank you for hosting this wonderful evening event. And of course, it's just barely after lunch here, so it'll take us a while to catch up with you. But thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to host this and have you here today. If you ever need to get in touch with us about any other events, you can just email me, and before I go, I will put my email in the chat. So if anybody needs to get in touch with me, you can. And so please enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you so much for joining us today. And good luck, everybody, and thank you.
Thanks, Eamon. Sorry about the sound.
Okay, not at all. And if you could just, if Paddy and Susan, if you just stay on for a second, because Bob